Hello, I'm Susan Iman, the Executive Director of the Lethbridge Sport Council. We are proud to welcome you to the YQL Stories, which stands for Your Quality Life Stories, where we have the privilege to talk with friends we've met through sport. We're pleased to have you join us to hear about their experiences and explore how sport and active living can impact your quality life.
Welcome, everyone, to our final episode of the Season 2 YQL Stories podcast series. We are very excited to present the world-renowned track and field coach, Larry Steinke. Coach Steinke continues to build his legacy in producing Olympic-level athletes who are not only elite in their respective sports, but are more importantly, good people. Larry is the head coach of the University of Lethbridge Pronghorns athletics and has also been a part of the Canadian national team program for over 20 years. Throughout our conversation, we discuss Coach Steinke's approach to competition, his coaching philosophy, and a sprinkle of his recipe for success. Please join us in listening to the extremely knowledgeable Canadian sport legend, Larry Steinke. All right, so we'll get right into it. So, hello, I'm Alex Engel. I am the host of your YQL Stories podcast. And today we are honored to have Larry Steinke, a legendary coach of consistently producing Olympic-level athletes and has made a profound impact on the Canadian university system as the head coach of the University of Lethbridge Pronghorns track and field team. Larry's contributions to Canadian athletics go beyond his role with the Pronghorns, as he has been a part of the Canadian national team program for more than 20 years. Is that correct?
Yeah, more than 25-ish.
25-ish, okay.
Yeah.
He's coached at 8 world championships, 5 Olympic Games, and other major international events such as the Commonwealth, 6 Olympic Games now.
Yep,
right?
6 Olympic Games,
with
Commonwealth
Paris,
Games, Pan Games. Yep.
Pan Games, and his athletes have amassed international medals, setting, I believe, 2 world records,
Yes.
7 Canadian records, and a too many to count provincial records. Under his leadership, Pronghorn athletes have won over 50 CIS national championships medals and 80 Canada West championship medals. They've also broken 6 Canada West and U Sport national records. Larry's coaching excellence has been recognized with numerous awards, including 7 Athletics Alberta High Performance Coach of the Year honors, Alberta Sport Coaching Recognition Award, and his introduction into the Lethbridge Hall of Fame with a coaching career spanning over 35 years. Larry's athletes have achieved international success, set records, and brought home numerous medals. All right, so after that, let's just dive into this journey. Welcome here, Larry.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. And it's not going to come out this week, but it is National Coaching Week.
National Coaching Week.
So congratulations on that as well. Just, sport's not sport without the coaches. Sure. So kind of what I'd like to do with, anybody I talk to here is we'd like to get into the early days. So track and field, is that kind of always been your sport? And if it's so, how has that been? How'd you get into it?
Not really. Actually, I thought I was going to play in the NBA. So
all right.
That was my when I was in high school. Obviously, I participated in track and field, obviously but I shouldn't say obviously, but from elementary school on. But in high school, junior high and high school, really was focused on basketball as what I thought was going to be my prime sport. And I was one of the top 2 recruits in high school when I was in grade 12. Ken Olynyk, who was the head coach here at the time, recruited me to come to Lethbridge. I forewent that, and I ended up going out east first.
Gotcha.
Before I came out here. But what really had to influence me in track and field to make the story kind of come around was Stan Hurton, who was from Czechoslovakia at the time. He was a national coach in Czechoslovakia, but ended up in Hinton, of all places, where I went to high school.
Interesting. Small town.
Yeah, small town. 10,000 people. About 8,000 people probably at that time, maybe a little less even. But they had kind of a record of trying to really get good educators, good coaches, and that kind of thing in the play, just to keep kids engaged and out of trouble, essentially.
Yeah.
And so Stan was a pretty big influence on me, and convinced me to pursue some track and field while I was still doing volleyball and basketball at the time. But
gotcha.
It was kind of a little bit of a long journey. And ironically, in grade 11, I did meet George Giemer through Stan and through another teacher that was an athlete at the university, but was teaching in Evansburg at the time, which was in our conference. And they said, when we were at provincial championships, you should meet George Giemer. He might be interested in it. And that was kind of my first introduction. But took a few years later before we actually met as athlete and coach when I came to the university. Yeah.
Okay. So that was you're balancing the different like volleyball, basketball, track and field through high school. That's that timeline. Okay.
Yeah, for sure. As well as lacrosse, soccer.
Oh yeah, multi-sport.
A small town, you get involved in pretty much everything, especially if you're a little taller, which I was a little taller than average.
Yeah.
Not so much so on our basketball team, because I was the second shortest guy on our basketball team, fair, which was unusual for obviously small town and for high school team.
Yeah, in Hinton.
Yeah, so my brother was the shortest at 6'2", so
that's a tall team in high school.
Holy crap. It was a tall team. So
wow, that's very interesting. So I guess let's kind of get into the Geemer part of it. George Geemer, he's quite renowned in our community and in the community of track and field across the world too. So is he kind of the reason why you came to Lethbridge, or what made you come to Lethbridge?
So I again, ironically, I thought I was going to come and play basketball at the university.
Gotcha.
And it got a hold of Ken and said, hey, you're still interested. I'm kind of tired of the East. It was a little bit, classes of 500 students. You're just a number and that sort of thing. And I thought I'd want to go to a smaller school. And he said, yeah, come along. And so I ended up coming, but before that happened, Rasmussen ended up getting a hold of me and knew that I'd play volleyball, and we ended up got hooked up with some of the players, and so my first year I actually played volleyball.
Interesting.
While I was at the
as a pronghorn here too.
As a pronghorn here, yeah. So and I actually played a couple of years as a multi-athlete, both when Dave Crook was here as with basketball, and George with track. I was kind of trying to balance both, but I would never recommend trying to do that at the university level. They don't really coincide. But I also had the coach at the time was saying, "Oh yeah, don't worry about coming to a lot of the practice if you can make once or two, but play on the weekend." I would never approach it that way, but the coach at the time. Bernie Stosky said, this is, we need to play. We need good players and to be able to compete. And it was a good team, but and we did beat that year both of the teams that went on to win national championships. Following years after that team kind of just ended up going its separate ways, because what happened was university ended up cutting men's volleyball not long after that and stuff. But so that was kind of how I ended up coming out here, and then got involved with, again, George. We had met, we started talking, and I ended up coming out for the track and field team at that time. I'd known a little bit about George, but more, obviously as athlete and coach, that's kind of where the relationship began, and kind of got to have a lot of influence, obviously, on life. Approach to life in a sense, and not so much the coaching. That was kind of more the influence. The hardships that you can go through and come out on the other side resilient and better for it was probably the biggest thing that took away from George. Obviously, hearing over many years the stories of being in a Russian prison camp after World War II and those kind of things. That's really what. Those are the things that really formed. Or were the influence on me. Some of it was in the coaching area, because that they go hand in hand. You pick up pieces from each coach. And so that was a lot of the influence where George had on me, was just in the approach to life in general, not just coaching.
That's pretty interesting. Yeah. And when you were a track athlete, you were javelin. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I started another long route. I started out as a jumper and hurdler.
Okay.
And that's what I did at university while I was at university. So I was almost 23 before I actually was introduced to javelin. It was just one of those freak things that we were at a track meet in Calgary. Yeah. And at the time, at some of the smaller meets, you still had to have 3 competitors entered for it to be considered a legal competition.
Gotcha.
We had another javelin thrower in the club. There was one from Calgary, I think, and George was like, "Oh, we need another person. Do you think, can you throw a javelin?" I said, "Well, I've never thrown a javelin in my life before." He said, took me aside and said, "Here's kind of how you throw it." And I ended up winning the competition of all things on the first time. And that was kind of, we were exploring decathlon at the time. And probably that would have been, as far as being world class, I probably would have been, looking back on it, better to have gone down the decathlete route than I would have with javelin. But yeah, that's how I was first introduced to javelin, and kind of went from there.
Wow, that's quite interesting. And I'll come back to the javelin part a little bit. I kind of want to get into your coaching as well. So the Canadian national team program, it's been, you said around 25, just over 25 years now. 8 world championships, 6 Olympic games with Paris after this past summer. And just, what's been like the most resonating, most rewarding part of that journey for you?
Yeah, the most rewarding part definitely is seeing athletes see their goals to come to fruition.
Yeah,
it really is. I mean, it sounds trite and cliche, but it really is about the athletes and their journey. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that I get out of it, is just seeing athletes improve. They don't need to be at a world-class level. They can just be. I work, with junior high kids. Even right now, I'm working with a couple of high school, junior high girls that are doing really well, and from just I've worked with them with the last 2 years, just watching them kind of go from introduction to the sport to then winning provincial championships this year. Within just a couple of years of participation, and if they stick with it, that journey is the one to enjoy. It's just no different than we talked briefly about Heather Stacy. I first started working with her when she was in grade 8. Wow. And followed through until she was in her late 20s. Jim was 15 when first started working with him, and through until he was, I think, 32. I want to say when he retired. So there's a long period of time where you get to see this development of them both in a performance realm as well as just as individuals, and that's where the George Giemer influence comes in. Is just people have to be good people, not just athletes. And that's kind of been my approach. And as long as they're there every day working hard, they don't have to become world class. We just focus on the journey.
Yep. So, and that's something like through the sports I've played and just coaches I've talked to, the good people part, that seems to be huge in terms of like, you're not just coaching the athlete, you're coaching the person too, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. So, there's just so many carryovers from life and sport and life. Yeah. I still believe it's a really big natural fit for for coaches who are, obviously in many sports we've had some bad eggs that have come through, but I would say in generally they're coaches. That's what they're really trying to do, is influence individuals, not just in sport but in life.
That's awesome. Yeah. Hey everyone, Alex here. I hope you're enjoying the episode so far. I just wanted to take a quick minute to talk to you about some opportunities we provide here at the Lethbridge Sport Council. So we run several programs throughout our community, such as our drop-in youth program, our roving gyms program, and our sport volunteer hub. These help provide inclusive sport access to youth and individuals of all ages and backgrounds. And did I mention that these programs are free of charge? Yeah, you heard me right. They're completely free. Please check out the links in our episode bio if you are interested in learning more about our programs and our volunteer opportunities. And if you want to do your part in providing a platform for our community programs to thrive, donations are greatly appreciated and can be done so by clicking the donations link in our bio. Thanks for listening, and now back to hearing from our Olympians. So with the Olympic Games that you've attended, and not only just attended, but you've also produced countless Olympic athletes, I guess we'll talk a little bit of what you think that key to that production is. Is it, and that maybe it's part of that good person too?
Yeah, I think it's a number of things. It's a support system. Like most of the people that I've worked with that have done well and been multiple Olympians, there's a support system around them, which I'm just one of the cogs. It's family is obviously part of that, the community, the training environment, who's in the training environment. The coaching obviously has an impact on the whole situation, but it's really, there's so many factors that have to come together that do well. You can be the most talented athlete, and if you don't have one of those cogs in there, it just makes the battle that much more difficult to get, to where you're going as far as your goals are concerned. So it really is there's so many of those things, and we have a confluence of all of those things in Lethbridge for the most part. For the longest time, we didn't really have the facilities part of it. Jim Stacy became an Olympian basically training in a stairwell. Wow. So that's one of the things that I tell coaches, is that it's necessity is the mother of invention. If you know what you have to be able to do, you do that and you make it work in whatever way you find that they can't. Obviously, you know, if it was a stairwell trying to develop a sprinter, that might not have been would be able to work on, 10-meter sprints and got to the blocks and stuff, but we wouldn't. But we'd had there was a netting system there installed in the back stairwell at the university, where now it's part of the First Choice Savings Center for Health and Witness, of course, I think. It's no longer there, but it was a stairwell that was in the back of the old gymnasium.
Gotcha.
And, you had to sit up on the stairs, and then down at the bottom of the stairs was a cement floor, cement walls about 25 feet high, and just throwing into a netting there. And we just needed to be able to get the repetitions in and do the things we needed to do. But that situation provided the environment that we needed. And so, and of course, couldn't throw metal hammers at the time.
No, yeah.
So, I developed this and started sewing these canvas bags that you could put weight in with a swivel, and then a cable and a wire and a handle on it. So it wasn't the event is up, but you were able to replicate the movements in hammer. Exactly.
Gotcha.
Sprinters, we were downstairs in level 0 in the hallway at the university. Had some Mondo that rolled out. It was only about 40 meters long, but that's how we developed sprinters, long jumpers. We had Chris Ripley, who was a medalist at what at that time was CAAU, which is then transformed into CIS and then U Sports. But that was, jumping onto a map in the hallway down in the basement of the university. Back in the day with George and when I was coaching as well, there was basically 200 meters worth of tunnel. There's only about 100 meters of it now at the university. And that's one of the reasons why that mirror at the end of the hallway is actually so that when you were running or the people were walking, because of course you couldn't close it down for track practice, but you were running down the hallways and back if you were an endurance runner or a sprinter or something. And so people, if they were walking up and down that hallway, they had to be, as they were coming around that corner, they would see if there was someone like us that didn't get. As far as I know, there were no collisions, whereas when we used to train under the bottom of the NMAX Center, we had a number of collisions where athletes would be sprinting down the straightaway, and WHL hockey player would be walking out of the change room at the exact same time, unawares that there's somebody coming the other way, and we'd have some collisions there. We rented some farmer's Quonset that they did equestrian in it, so it was a sand bottom, and we set up. We rolled out Mondo. Had the pole vault pits set up there.
Oh, wow.
The hammer circle, the shot put circle set up there, and that's how we did pole vault.
Wow.
And stuff. Each day we'd have to dig out the hole where you put the metal plant box into, set up, the dust and dirt and sand everywhere and stuff. But you find ways to do what you need to be able to do for the development of the sport. Yeah. And so that's kind of what I think has been the mainstay, is just we end up doing what we need to do, find a way to do what you need to do to get to that level. If you know there's a gap between where you're at and where you want to be, and if you've done good research as a coach, you know that there's A, B, and C that you have to do to get to the next stage of that, and you just find a way to do it.
Yeah. Kind of like that. It's almost seems a bit like a no excuses attitude, kind of, right? Like not necessarily like to a bad way or anything, but just like, you know what, I'm not going to let these barriers in front of me, or the cards I have dealt, or the cards I'm going to play.
For sure. In New Zealand, she's worked with a number of national athletes. In fact, Valerie won numerous world championships and Olympic championships coming from New Zealand, which is small. And she always said, don't let a small country, small city, small town, small university, those were my words, the small country were her words, but don't let that be what you use as an excuse for not doing well on the world stage.
That's awesome.
You take the advantage of being a small place and build on those things. As smaller, you can make changes easier, less administration to worry about across the country. Information sharing is easier. Take those kind of things and build on that. And that's really what New Zealand has done, especially in the sport of track and field. Obviously in rugby, some of those things, they've become, world beaters in some of those sports.
Definitely, that's fascinating. And just to kind of touch on, like, yes, we we've gone over your athletes. They've set many world records, lots of different Canadian records, medals. And you talked about, like, you're looking for good people. Good. It's nice. We have a great support system here in Lethbridge, and it's helpful when they have their own that come along with it. What is there any specific qualities you look for in those people? Like, what defines you, or to you, what do you define as a good person that you're wanting to work with?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is the commitment that they're going to be there every day. If I'm going to be there, they're there, or vice versa. And that's the first step, is that they just, they're going to show up from day to day, because a lot of it is just getting up out of the bed in the morning and showing up. If you're training twice a day, got to be there at 6 o'clock in the morning, then again later in the afternoon. It really does, when people say the grind, that's the grind part of it, is just the repetitiveness of the training, especially when you're doing the same thing multiple times over repetition after repetition in a closed skill sport like, say, hammer. Where, I keep coming back to that, but that's kind of where I had the most success. So there's, that repetition factor in life, daily life, daily sessions. The whole thing repeats after a while, and you have to have a certain mindset to be able to deal with the rigors and the repetitiveness of doing something like that. So that's kind of, and that's not something you notice necessarily right away, and it's not something that they necessarily are cognizant of right away. It's not like I just tell them, if you're going to commit, you need to be here every day. That you commit to. That whether if you choose 2 days, then to be here all of those 2 days. If it's 5 days a week, you have to be here for all that. And that gradually grows to where they begin a little bit more of a bigger commitment to doing it. But that's at its essence, that's kind of where we start, is just showing up each day, and that's where the success is just getting there, repeating it, and you will see improvement. From day to day to day, you will see improvement. Obviously, it's harder when you're storing into a stairwell for 4 to 6 months of the year. You don't necessarily see it, but there's ways of building that into, in the strength training or things like that, where you're measuring velocity of the bar, or things like that, where you can kind of see the improvement. So you're always looking for small ways of building that positivity and confidence in the athletes for those kind of things.
So it obviously would help if they're a little bit pre-motivated type deal to...
So that's, it's kind of a nefarious to say motivation. From my perspective.
Yeah, of course.
I think there's, if you're able to get up and be doing the same thing every day, and it's not just because you're motivated, because there are a lot of days where you're not going to be motivated. But if you can get up and repeat that from day to day to day without that, so the perseverance of doing it, the commitment to getting up and doing it, I think motivation, yes, you have to be motivated. There's motivation, but it's more the commitment of saying, okay, I have to get up tomorrow morning, and you get up regardless of whether you're motivated or not. You get there. A lot of times you're not motivated. You get there, the group environment, or just once you start into it, that starts to motivate you a little bit as you go through. But that's motivation is sometimes overused in my mind, because you do have to have that. So you're motivated towards a goal, but that's going to, kind of undulate through your time as an athlete of just how motivated you are. But if you're committed to it, that's going to be
so more so like disciplined commitment.
If you're disciplined, and that's what I say.
All pieces of the puzzle.
You don't need motivation if you're disciplined.
Correct.
Because if you're disciplined, like in the military, there's no one that's probably very motivated to get up at 5 a.m. and as a SEAL team member, go out and get into a wetsuit and get into the cold water and do whatever it is you're doing on that mission. Those kind of things. And so that's why, and glad you brought up discipline, because that's what I usually say, is discipline is, in my mind, is more important than motivation for that aspect, because you don't have to be that 100%. Motivated every morning, but you have to be disciplined to do it.
As we know, motivation fluctuates a lot more than anything.
Exactly.
That's interesting. Exactly. Yeah. Awesome. So that's a big piece of what we look for, what you're looking for in the athletes you're looking for. And then kind of once you have athletes that you're coaching currently, let's say, or ones that you've coached in the past even, is there a balance that you have to think about between like the technical aspects of each sport and say just the psychological aspects of being a high performance athlete?
Yeah, there's
and what does that look like?
Not so much, and I don't like the word balance because there's suggestion that somehow you can put the two in unison. I understand, and I'm stealing this phrase kind of from Donna Harris, who is she's a coach educator in athletics, and she did her graduate work in coach wellness. And by wellness, we mean everything from, making sure that you have what people call balance in life, but it's more blending. So it's trying to blend the two together, your life, sport blending, to find a way of, it's not necessarily the balance because there's going to be way heavy on one side of it. That's not. So you never really come to balance, but you come to a blending that works for you and your partner in your life, your family, the people around you, and that goes for the athlete as well as the coach, right? You have to find a way to blend everything together so that it works. And I think that's one of the most difficult things as an athlete, because people say it's, from the outside they say, oh, you have to sacrifice so much, but truly the athlete, if they're enjoying it, and that's the other thing that has to be in place, they have to enjoy what they're doing. If they're enjoying it, for them, it's not a sacrifice to be getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning, doing that same schedule and repeating, missing the parties, because they're, refraining from alcohol because that has a performance factor.
Or, they have to be up at 5 and I don't want to be going to bed at 2. Right?
Exactly. And that's, you very quickly find out that schedule's not going to work if you're going to bed at 2 and trying to get up at 5. So that's kind of, really, I think, an important factor that people sometimes miss is that life sport blending, and because they do try to think of it as balance. You're never going to balance it. You just need to try and blend it so that it works for your environment and you and the people around you.
That's all. I've never really thought too much about that word, the balance. Like, I've just kind of said it lightly, not really thinking. But now that you say that makes a lot of sense. The blending compared to a balance. For sure. When you really look at it, that's a big difference.
It is, right? Because the scale is always going to be one. You're always going to be heavy on the sports side where you're trying. That's just comes with it. As a coach, you're always going to be heavy on that side of things as trying to, the things are, but you do need this. It's not so much that it balances out, but it blends enough that allows you to be healthy, to have a good mental capacity and awareness and of yourself and the people around you, so you're not burning out as an athlete or as a coach, those kind of things. So it really is, as I said, I keep repeating it, but it's blending for me as opposed to just balancing the scale. As it were.
I love that. That's an awesome way to think about it. And then, so you kind of mentioned a little bit, this is, I'm trying to get at this building piece of what your coaching philosophy is. So we have pieces of it, but I'm wondering if, and as a high performance coach, I'm assuming coaching philosophies are always expanding. It's like a canvas that's always building. What, let's maybe go with this. Where did it start, I guess, in terms of your philosophy of coaching and kind of what it's come to now?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I'm not sure I can pinpoint where it really started, because it was, if I look back, I can't really point to one particular thing that started building. It's kind of
maybe more general sense.
It's like that snowball that you build and you start rolling down the hill and it just gets its own momentum.
Gotcha.
Again, I go back to probably Stan Hurton and some of the coaches that I was exposed to back in high school. I was really lucky to have good high school coaches. Rod Phillips, a basketball coach. He'd won numerous provincial championships at big schools at Lord Byng in Vancouver and things like that. Ended up in this small little town. Stan Hurton, Czechoslovakian Olympic champion in decathlon, and comes to a small town in Hinton. Al Shea, was a national team level volleyball coach. All of these people in a small town that just kind of oozed excellence in a way, but it was never that overt. It was just taken for granted that you were going to focus on you as a person and an individual, getting better every day. And that was, sort of where, the philosophy of there's no failure, but in ceasing to try came to it. It actually, every day I saw it when I walked into my high school. That was actually on the front doorway of our high school, and I just lived with that that motto for most days of my life. You just, as long as you're putting in the effort. Now, obviously, there has to be a directed effort. Just working hard doesn't do it. But if
there's got to be purposeful, right?
Yeah, it's very purposeful and directed. You're going to succeed in whatever it is you're doing. Now, are you going to become an Olympic champion? Maybe. Not necessarily, but it's that journey of you're not going to fail as long as you're getting up, trying, and working hard at it every day, because there's so many things that you will get from that you can then take into the rest of your life.
Of course.
Moving forward. So it was apropos that, that was just hanging above my head as I walked into school every day, and it just stuck with me as something that really, and I'm not even sure where the quote came from. No one could ever tell me
just up on
why
the wall.
It was just up on the above the entrance at the school when we went in, and I thought it was good not just for educators but for coaches and athletes and people in general. That
you can apply that quote to anything in life, right?
Absolutely. So it's like so many things in coaching. We just take from others to make it our own and build for our environment the things that we need. The things that I can do in my environment might not be able to do in another environment.
Of course, yeah.
What I tell people, they're always asking me, "Oh, can I give sample workouts?" Sure, I can give you sample workouts, but odds are, one, you need to know, is this even applicable to your athlete?
Sure.
And two, is this something you can do in your environment? Because I have really good environment in Lethbridge where we can do everything that we need to do to be successful. That's not necessarily going to be possible. You can be successful, but you have to find a way to Jimmy rig that into your setting. If I give you recipes, that recipe is only as good as the ingredients that you're going to put into it.
For sure.
What the outcome is for the final product. So it's that goes right along with it. I think is just every day you get up and you're trying your best at what you do, and if that's the case, there's just no failure in what you're doing.
Yeah, that's awesome, and that's been a motto of yours. I've read the research for quite a while. Sure. It seems like, obviously, since you were a young person.
Yeah.
Is there a method to instilling that into your athletes as well, or is it something like, do you have a similar thing where you have a banner or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, in the high performance room at the university, we have a number of quotes that are on the walls all around it, and we were all asked to contribute, and that was one of the ones that I contributed at the time. So it's there. Not everybody's always looking at it every day and necessarily reading it, like taking it to heart, like I did but it's kind of subconsciously there all the time. I think some of those things, I'm not a big believer of pain is temporary, pride is forever kind of thing. But that's because there's a lot of that misleads athletes down a road where they just become potentially overtrained or hurt, those kind of things. But try to instill the work ethic, and I think that's one of the things that we do is we just outwork everyone else that in the country at the university level. There's, if you were to look at other universities, there's nobody that puts in the hours that we do. Now, it's not just about putting in the hours; they're very concerted effort hours. But because again, part of that is we have the environment here where we can do that. Not everyone's able to. For example, at the U of A, they have a huge building there, the Butterdome, built for the 1983 World Universiade Games. They hardly have any access to it. They can't throw in it. It's this big, huge monstrosity of a building that they have a hard time getting access to, and two, they have a hard time booking into it when they need to.
Interesting.
They can only do certain activities in there. There's just so much room. Whereas, for us, we had a stairwell. I mean, we couldn't destroy it, right? But we had access to it every day at any time we wanted to. And the university was very supportive of that. And then when we moved to getting the new building, was what do you need not to be able to compete in the building, but to be able to train? Because that was the focus at the time, was that we're not going to build something that people can compete. It's just not in the budget. as it was, the budget kind of tripled by the time it was built compared to what they started with.
Of course.
And it had to be downsized from our original vision.
Okay.
But basically, shout out to Brian Sullivan, who is the lead on the project. List the things that you need to be able to do what you need to do to be successful.
Yeah.
And that led to a one-of-a-kind throwing facility that we have at the university, which I don't know if you've ever been in there, but in the North Gym, there's 2 large netting systems that come down from the ceiling into the floor. Made a huge difference in how we could do things.
I can imagine.
And so there's nothing in the country like it. So it was just thinking outside of the box. And Brian Sullivan, again, at the time, can't be thankful enough for the support. Him, Sandy Slavin, the people at the university who kind of said, you know what, there's some success going on here. What can we do to make it successful within the confines of what we have?
Here's what our limits are. What can we do, and how can we, maybe get you out of a stairwell?
Exactly. And now with hopefully the new dome that will come online next fall, the same thing. We're trying to look at it. Okay, what do we do to be successful? As an athletic department, and what are the to make a huge difference for women's rugby if they can do that, as opposed to in a gym where you can't really do any hitting, you can't do anything at full speed, those kind of things, as opposed to now you have an entire rugby field indoors when it's snowing out to be able to train. So it's those kind of things that I think really have made a difference in how we approach things and do it both in our sport, but in Lethbridge in general. I think Lethbridge is pretty supportive of those kind of initiatives, and really try to focus on, okay, what do we need to do what we need to do. Judo, you would talk to Joe Melly.
Yep.
The judo club used to train at the university in a small dojo. Then when the new building was built, they built their own building, and now they have a great facility. They're able to do what they do. So there's, just building along the way to get bigger and better as far as what you need to do to expand and thrive as a club, as a coach, as an athlete.
Of course, and that's another piece of that support system you're talking about earlier.
For sure,
right? Like you need those pieces to continue to excel, continue to grow.
Exactly.
All that stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
I kind of want to get into I know you've done some work and as a PhD candidate, and now successfully defended and everything quite a while ago, I'm assuming.
Graduate studies a while. I can't remember how long ago. That's 25, 30 years ago now. But
And from what I've heard and people I've talked to, it was you did some stuff about periodization. Is that correct in saying that?
No, not quite.
Okay.
So there was some of the stuff that I did I did a longitudinal study at one time, which we called it SAGAP, Southern Alberta Girls Growth Assessment Project.
Okay.
With Jim Day and Neil Little. Neil Little was a physiologist on campus. Jim Day was more in the kinanthropometry as well as sport history a little bit, but he was they wanted to start this project, and I said, I'd be willing to take it on. We did a replication kind of the Medford boys study, which was a huge study that was done in the U.S. in, I want to say it was Medford, Oregon. And it was basically, finding out all of the details about how you go from pre-puberty all the way through. So you're looking at anthropometric measures, and those kind of things. So what we did was expanded it. So we did strength, we did overhand throw, we did max VO2, anaerobic threshold, all of this on the same. We started with 300 and some girls that were 11 years old at the same time, or at the time, followed them through until they were into university. And we had a not too bad dropout. We only ended up with about 185, I think it was, in the end. So that's not bad for
10-something years. Yeah, that's a pretty good attrition rate.
People. So we had rural and urban. The rural came from around the Raymond Carson area, and then the urban came from 3 of the schools within Lethbridge.
Gotcha.
So, and then as well, they did nutrition logging and things like that. So it was expanded. We could still be publishing off of the data that we collected at that time.
That's amazing.
We did a couple in International Journal of Human Biology and stuff like that. But that sort of led into my interest in the periodization of things and biomechanics was obviously always important, but the physiology became part of the whole periodization search that I went on for finding out just what makes the best coaches the best.
The best, yeah.
And came across numerous different philosophies and ways, but there were a lot of similarities in some of those, and how they periodized was, in many ways they were different, but taking the things that were the same within them. And that's how, came across Dr. Bondarchuk, Anatoly Bondarchuk, who kind of, in North America, we had Tudor Bompa, who kind of led the way with periodization at the time, and Matveyev et al. And they kind of, that's, if anyone is doing anything periodization and they've gone through NCCP coaching or even just other, they've probably been exposed to that. Whereas in Europe, it was more the exposure to a different way of putting things together in your training via a lot of the Russian and East German influence. So stuff that kind of trickle out. I mean, we look at journals and articles and all the rest of it in North America. All of that's happening in seclusion within the confines of what was, considered the Iron Wall at the time, right? Or the Iron Curtain. Yeah. But because there's still all those journals and stuff, but they just weren't coming out of the country. And sometimes they would start eking out, especially with the breakup of the USSR, a lot of that material started coming out. And so people were, okay, we need to get this translated. And so it was really interesting to see how, if you were to try and propose a study where you said, we're going to try and create Olympians, X, Y, and Z group are going to be exposed to A, B, and C periodization plans. That would probably never really get through an ethics board or a committee. Whereas what was happening in the USSR, they had all of these sports schools, and they just had Dr. Anatoly Bondarchuk, who was just saying, all right, we're going to do this with this group. We're going to do this with this group. We're going to do this with this group. And they just tried to find what were the best methods. This group might have, got the bad end of the stick, and there could have been some world-class athletes in there, but they were never exposed to a program that would have promoted that because they're trying out things. And that was literally thousands upon thousands of athletes that they had access to in these sports schools around that those were the guinea pigs, right? But in a coaching sense. You could just really never propose to do that in the West. Of course. It would just be, you can imagine the red tape trying to do that. Plus, you couldn't. Even if you went okay, now you're at a certain level and say to a coach, here's what we want to try and do. And the coach is like, I'm not going to do that. That might not, might or might not turn out. Well, that was what was happening. And eventually, they started out with this and they ended up closing in on these are the things that you need to be doing and how you periodize that make the biggest difference. And so that really, in reading it, it was very difficult to come across good translations of the material. Even after Dr. B had started publishing some of these books, where Melsif or others were translating them, they were never really good translations. And sometimes were giving you the wrong suggestions. But having, when Dr. B, as everybody calls him, came to Kamloops in 2005, that kind of opened the door to a lot of people being able to, pick his brain, athletes moving there, training with them, et cetera. And that really kind of opened the door for me to be able to get a little bit better handle on some of the things that, you'd read, you'd heard, you'd been exposed to, and you're like trying to figure them out on your own. But then you're, in training camps and stuff, you're sitting there talking with them and in his broken English and you go, oh, that makes sense. Now, a light switch goes off. And you're just like, that totally makes sense when and there's just so much of it was just, and he would call him, he was a coach. He's the most accolades of any coach in the throwing events as far as world champions, especially in hammer. There wasn't an Olympian medalist that didn't go through his programs for many years until just recently when he came to Canada. So, there's trying to figure out, okay, what's the magic mixture, as all coaches were trying to do, and can I steal it and put something together to form my own? And that's kind of what I did with him. Paul Namath from Hungary, same thing. Trying to get as much information as how some of these people really became the best at what they're doing. And it wasn't just, one-offs. It was like from decades of, Olympics to Olympics. Here's what's happening. There's got to be something to it.
Oh, yeah. There's a trend. It's not, this isn't by accident. This
for sure. And here it's always, the coaches are out doing something, and then the science world is trying to verify it after the fact. Here it was all intermeshed, right? The scientists are going, let's try this because we have a hunch here, about how to produce velocity, or what are the things you're going to do in the weight room that produce velocity, because velocity is so integral to so many sports.
Yes.
So let's try X, Y, and Z. And we're getting good hard data, So there was things that were being done there that just were so innovative, and things that were, we would just kind of laugh at. But at the same time, George Giemer's pulling people behind his car as sprinters down the road to do overspeed training, right? The same kind of philosophy, just that thinking outside of the box, and they're trying things, they work or they don't, and they just, things fall by the side if they're not working. And then later on, the scientists were coming going, well, let's see if that really is working. And generally there was, if they were able to replicate it, so much of that is hard to replicate because you've got to do a longitudinal study, right? So much of what we do and confirmation is done on unwitting phys ed students.
Yeah, 100%.
Right? They're our guinea pigs. So we're going to do this. We're going to do this strength, 6-week strength testing. Or strength program, and see what happens at the end. Well, very different when you're working with untrained individuals, or maybe there's a spattering of trained individuals that have had exposure to it. So the outcomes are going to be very different, as opposed to, okay, we've got this longitudinal data here of thousands upon thousands of athletes in different sports from this point to becoming Olympians.
Wow.
So what are the things that are most transferable, and what periodization works, and the rest of it? Whereas in the West, we were just going, we think this will work if you do an undulating pattern of, okay, the first day is high intensity, the next day is, lower intensity, and so on. Which just proves unwittingly to be not the most efficient way to do it. It works, but the people that have done it end up doing it for a longer enough period of time that they end up, it's actually very similar to what Dr. B and they were doing in that part of the world. So it's a very different way of thinking of things. You're not trying to fit the athlete to the periodization. You're trying to fit the periodization to what the athlete and how they adapt. So the athlete will pretty much adapt. If you've had 4 weeks off and you're exposed to a training program, you'll adapt pretty much in one of three ways. Your curve of adaptation will fit into that one of those three form factors. And then, of course, okay, well, what do we do after you've reached sport form in that periodization? Okay, now what do we do? Well, you're keeping the stimulus the same and letting the athlete adapt, instead of trying to have, here's what we have. Hopefully the athlete adapts to this undulating curve of intensity and volumes. Instead of you just keep it all the same.
So you keep that stimulus as your control, basically.
The same, exactly. And so what becomes the factor is the density of that training, and then that extends or compacts how long it takes to come into what we call sports form, or readiness. Some people might call it readiness, and that we've gotten stuck into this. 3 weeks on, 1 week off, 3 weeks off, or those kind of patterns that we're trying to fit the athlete to. And the athlete they're adapting in a whole different way than what you're trying to plan to. And if you're making a change just when they're on a down sweep of their adaptation, you make that change. Now what you're doing is forcing them to basically just have a declination in their adaptation, or stagnation, or because you're not looking to make the changes in the program when the athlete's ready to. You're going by this formula of, I've got 3 weeks and I have 1 week. And athletes don't work on that schedule, right?
Correct,
athletes are adapting. Someone might take, for example, 6-8 weeks. Someone might make 2 weeks. And what the determinant is how many exposures they have to that program. So, let's say, for example, I've had athletes who adapt within about 25 sessions. For us, that's only 2 weeks time. But say, for example, Jim Stacy, who adapted in a much longer period of time, he took almost 3 times as long to that same stimulus. He would take that. So you have to find a way to measure what's happening with the athlete. And some of that, obviously, throwing distance is one, right?
Yeah.
If you've put, you're throwing overweight implements, let's say their competitive implement is a 4K, they're throwing a 5K.
Yeah.
And if you're working on the force side of the force velocity curve, and then you're trying to, you need to, there's no sense me just randomly in 3 weeks changing that, if I don't know that they need that change at that time. But if you're following the curve and you know how they adapt, and that's the difficult part, is that at the beginning with the athlete, know when and how they adapt. You've got measurables, you've got data that you can go back to, and then also continually, then you're going to probably be more successful than you are if you're trying to fit an athlete to this undulating curve of periodization, which is what we do a lot in North America. The best ones that don't, unwittingly, or kind of end up following that same pattern. They just kept that undulating curve for long enough that the athlete finally adapts. But most coaches end up, on the physical side anyway, that physical adaptation takes a lot longer than what we think, especially the higher your performance is. And then you get into the fact that, that's not just for improvement, but now how do we control for performance on the day? How do we perform on that day? So we need to know, again, we take, for example, the person that needed 25 sessions to do that. Well, we need to be kind of counting back. Okay, 25 sessions from that need. We have to be making a change here, and that adaptation hopefully will come to fruition on the day, as opposed to in North America, we've got this concept, we just unload them. We just say, and especially when you're working with women, that's very problematic because things, for lack of other terms, go to hell when you unload. It's very unpredictable what's going to happen. Males, not as much. You can get some, but that's not an adaptation. That's just a recovery. If you think about it that way, that doesn't mean they're peaking. That just means they were recovered and whatever they were exposed to from whatever they were exposed to before. And hopefully that recovery meant that they could perform that. But that doesn't mean that they were at their highest form of adaptation at that point in time, right? Same with, and women, it's even more so, because if you, generally they can take on a little bit more load and a little bit more stimulus. And if you start undoing that, the results can be very unpredictable, let's say, as opposed to trying to figure out how their adaptation curve looks like with those kind of stimulus and go forward, if that makes sense.
That does. Again, just knowing the person, knowing the athlete, and that timing factor, they work together, and you have to,
for sure.
Like you said, it seems like it'd be a bit of a trial and error almost every time you're doing it.
It is, to an extent. It is. But if you've got the data that you're working with,
you have a starting point.
We've got an adaptation curve. We're just trying to find out, and it's not going to happen the way you expect it every time, right?
Yeah.
So, for example, if you take someone who's already won a world championship, say, and they have a performance level, you might be trying to eke out more performance out. But if they're 30 years old, are you really going to get them from, let's say, Usain Bolt, who set the world record? Well, where do you go from there? Are you trying to improve that? Yeah, you're trying to, but more importantly is, let's run close to that when we need to at an Olympic Games or World Championships. So you're trying to work that, you're taking advantage of that curve of adaptation to then what people will typically call peaking. Instead of just unloading to do it, you're trying to have them adapt the adaptation to that program take place, so that the peak of that adaptation is when you're trying to compete at the most important time of the year. Then maintain that. Let's say, for example, if we put it in basketball or hockey terms, if you were talking about that, now we need to keep it at that for 6 months because you're going to be having 6 months worth of games. But we needed to get you there first, and so often what comes in, they come in at mid-level. Now we're trying to play them into shape or have them adapt while we're playing, and that there is some adaptation, but you have no idea how that's going to happen. Generally, you have to get an idea of how that, and putting all of those 5 guys on the court at the same time and hoping they're all going to be performing at the same time. So it becomes a little bit more difficult. But that was what they were doing. back in the day in Russia, they're like, let's find out what it is. But physical prepared, and this kind of goes back to, I think, a little bit of a question you'd asked earlier about the psychological side of it.
Sure, yeah.
If the athlete knows they're well prepared, that goes a long way to performing well on 100%. The psychological side. Yeah. If you have doubts because of your training, that's the number one thing that you have to. Yeah. So an athlete, whatever system you're working with an athlete, you have to believe in it, and you have to. The athlete has to believe in it.
Correct. Yeah.
It'll work.
Yep.
You just have to believe in it. But if you don't, and the athlete doesn't believe in it, it never will be successful.
Sure. And even if it is, they say they're doing everything right, but they don't believe that, they could be at for, like you said, peak of their performance capabilities. Yep. But if they don't mentally believe they are,
right,
how likely is it that they're going to unlock that on the day of competition?
And that gets to be, that can be the difficult part of this periodization planning, is that there's always these valleys. But if the athlete is prepared and you're educating them that, hey, there's going to be 6, 8, 10, 12 sessions where we know this is going to happen, it's easier for them to take that and go, okay, I'm not going to beat myself up because my performance level, it's the training that's causing that, nothing I'm doing that's causing that. So they can kind of almost let that load off, because they're not going to blame. They can blame me if they want.
Sure.
And I always tell athletes, if you're taking care of the other things outside of the 6 hours of training day we have and the other 18 hours, as long as you're taking care of that, then you can blame me for everything else. But if you're not taking care of your nutrition or your sleep, etc., then we can't even begin to state that it's the programming, the periodization of the training. It's so many of those other factors. But that's where I'll say, what would you rather do? Be able to blame me? And I can take it. I have the shoulders to blame it. If you do everything well, because it's not always going to be successful, but the more you can learn and experiment along the way, but it's educated experimentation in a sense.
Interesting. Gotcha. And kind of wanted to, just an interesting thought came to mind just now with the difference of team sport, and you're more of a individual sport for the most part. Yep. So when I come from team sport background with hockey was my main thing. So for coaches, you're coaching the team and they're all towards one same goal.
Yep.
Whereas individual sport, yes, you're all going to the same goal, but it's on your own to an extent.
Yes.
So I'm not sure how much you've done coaching outside of that, but what's it like, I guess, to coach a bunch of individuals who are, say, let's just for argument's sake, hammer throwers. And, they're both in the same category of weight and throwing, and, they're competitors, but they're also teammates. What's that dynamic like?
So it can be an interesting dynamic, but we try to focus on the process more than the outcome. Again, it does build some of that competitive can be good, because there's no doubt that
you push each other.
High level brings about high level from those that are around you. If you surround yourself with people who are successful, you generally are going to be successful if you're putting in the work and the effort and the things that you need to do. It can be tricky at times. I would say both on the male and the female side, with just some intricacies of how they interact. We had this discussion yesterday in our day before, in our coaches meeting, talking about the differences between males and female and how that's approached. And there are some nuances to trying to keep the camaraderie there and the supportiveness,
of course,
but as well the competitiveness. And I think I really take the approach that we're going to be successful if all of the individuals are successful. Do you know what I mean? So
I think so.
We talk about trying to, we'll have the top 4 positions on the podium. You guys can determine which are the 4.
Sure.
But we're going to do it as a group, and we were the only university that's done that, where we've on numerous occasions have been the top 3 or the top 4 in those events. And those positions often change depending on which competition it is.
Yeah.
So try to focus on it as the process, but keep the friendly rivalry there. And a lot of that comes down to the everyday training sessions, because we are testing, we are measuring at pretty much every single training session that we're at. So it becomes commonplace. They know where they are about, but that doesn't prevent them from trying to knock somebody off us, because we do focus also secondarily nobody's on a pedestal.
Yeah.
None of your competitors, the world record holder, anyone that they put their pants on one leg at a time, just like everybody else does when they get up in the morning. There's nothing special about them. They've just done the work already. You're still in the process of doing the work. So again, kind of comes back to the process, but at the same time, not, as I say, if you put somebody on a pedestal, there's very little room for you to stand on it.
Oh yeah.
Right. So if you're now not to have disrespect, you have to have respect for what they've done to get there. But
you're not going to go and belittle them or something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But putting them as a pedal automatically puts them ahead of you.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
So you have to think about it. And so we teach that the same thing in the training environment. I said, if they're working, they've got, because we mix in our training sessions. There'll be Olympians, there'll be kids who are in junior high, all training in the same environment, which I believe is an asset. When they see that, and so they begin to, it becomes familiar to them. They see what they're doing, and they go, I can do that.
Can do that too. Yeah.
And it makes it in some ways easier, but there's still competitiveness is good. I mean, in the end, there's only going to be one person standing at the very top of the podium. So that does come into it, but it's I think that's a healthy part of it, but trying to keep it healthy and not, that person's an ass and I'm
you don't get any animosity in there.
It's just, and so we've been pretty successful at having a group that really is supportive of each other, and we're probably one of the only teams at a university track meet who literally almost from event to event, the whole team in a sense just follows from event to event.
That's cool.
And just is there to support. And I really try to encourage that as much as possible.
Even across like different events.
Yeah. So the sprinters or the throws, they'll
so
kind
cool.
of walk around and it's really supportive. I mean, university track and field is pretty much very supportive even amongst, but a team like Saskatchewan, who potentially has 150 athletes on it, we're restricted to a team of 30 roster. It's very family-like as opposed to that. They'll get, I didn't even know that person was on my team.
Get lost in the shuffle.
And that's the comment the athletes will say to our athletes. So really, you guys are that cordial? And like, yeah. And they say, wow, didn't even know half of these people were on our team because they all train separately. They have different coaches, et cetera, because it is such a big machine that they're in the working of things. So
of course. Yeah. Wow. Well, we're sitting at just about an hour. Can I keep you for a couple more questions?
Yeah, I'm good. I've got at least for another hour, but not to say
we're
that
not
we should go another hour. I'm not sure everyone else will pay attention for another.
That's fair enough.
Hour, but
so I got two more kind of main questions I want to make sure I hit. The one is you've talked a lot today about Lethbridge and the city of Lethbridge, the community we have here. I've been here for 6-7 years. My family is from here, but the one thing I've noticed is it's super. The more you look at it, it's very sport oriented. There's a lot of athleticism, a lot of support for sport and all that stuff.
Yep.
What do you think, if you were to chalk it up to something, would be some of the key factors of growing sport in Lethbridge and why this city has been so successful in comparison to like Calgary, Edmonton, Toronto, Vancouver, these bigger centers, helping us stay relevant with them?
Yeah, I think it's mostly the community focus that people have taken when they've tried to move on projects that are going to, whether it's building the soccer field on the north side of town or, the health and wellness center at the university.
Yep.
It was really trying to sell it to the community as something that's going to be beneficial for the community.
Yeah.
When people go onto the world stage, does nothing but positive things for the community of Lethbridge. And I think that's really one of the things participation is important. I would never say that that's not, a hallmark of getting people involved, but you also have this other concurrent, but also intermingled stream of excellence that goes with that. And I think that they do go hand in hand. And I think that we really pride ourselves in the Lethbridge area that we punch above our weight. We're small, but we still have lots of people that become Olympians, or
of course.
Lots of people that win provincial championships, national championships, etc. And I think there's that's kind of starts in the schools. I'd like to see it across more sports in the schools that really some of the most attended games are some of the rivalries we have in Southern Alberta between rural and urban schools. LCI Raymond, people talk about the days of basketball or football or those. And so it kind of, I think some of it is really organic. It's not that people have gone out to do it. It's just kind of grown on its own. And there's some people who have committed to excellence and participation, and that kind of, then that success breeds success. And I'm a big believer of, success breeds success. And you can always pull out the hallmarks of what makes some of those programs good. And again, I'm going to say it comes down to coaching and the environment, right? The coaches are the ones that are there leading it. Athletes will come and go over the years, but the mainstay is generally that coach. And what is their philosophy? How do they approach it? And, that there's some commonalities there generally when you look at all of those coaches and how they've been. And I just think that Lethbridge is really, been a breeding ground for not just the athletes, but the coaches. We've had a lot of good coaches come through Yash Senda. How many years was he developing national champions in judo and Olympians? Joe Melly is an example. Of course. Tom Greenway, some of the others that, went on to huge success. And sometimes I think we don't celebrate that success enough in Lethbridge.
Oh, yeah.
We almost are, we're too humble about it in a sense, because we punch above our weight, and let's celebrate that when we have people, Paige and Taylor, in the 3v3 team at the Olympics last summer in Paris. I mean, that's great for our community. They both contribute. With the junior horns programs, they contribute as assistant coaches with the women's programs. So there's always ways that they're giving back, which sometimes we don't even realize. And that success is going to help breed more success. And so it's kind of been a hallmark of our community when we've tried to get things like the 1975 Winter Canada Games. When the NMAC Center was built and those kind of things, we tried to, at one point, try to get the Canada Summer Games. Western Canada Summer Games that were going to be held here. Unfortunately, our bid wasn't successful, but trying to do some of those things, I think, as a community has really been. We've got a lot of good volunteers, and a lot of those coaches are volunteers. Majority of the coaches are volunteers. Very few paid coaches, not just here but across the country. But they put the time and the effort in, and that really, I think, is the hallmark. That's that community aspect where people really want to see the small community do well on the big stage.
Of course, well, it's like you said, like kind of everything you talked about there. To me, that gives me a sense of this culture that we have here, right? And it's that success breeds success, that culture of that, and the giving back. Like I talked to Casey Bosch, one of those basketball players, a couple weeks ago, and she's got these goals with basketball, of course, but she's also doing her education degree, right? Yes. She's going to be a teacher in our community.
PS3 right now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's just kind of cool to see, how everything connects, I guess, in that way. And how we get there.
For sure.
And specifically, we're trying to, this podcast, we're celebrating Olympians and stuff like that. So with the Paris 2024 Olympics, is there any moment that stuck out to you? Any memory you want to share? Or just something like that?
There's been so many great memories over 6 Olympic Games that you look back on, and I mean, one of them, not from Paris in particular, I'll go into Paris in a moment, but the one that stands out for me is, again, in 2008, Jim Stacey, with his first Olympic Games, became the first Olympic hammer thrower since 1920, I think it was. The first time that we ever had. That kind of opened the door for a lot of what we had for success that led into this year in Paris. We had a lot of those barriers broken down by Heather Stacey, her sister, Sultana Frizzell. They were all kind of just breaking these new barriers of becoming Olympians as hammer throwers, which nobody kind of really thought of. I mean, I feel bad sometimes for Heather, because there was a lot of people that said, "You're a musician, you're not an athlete," and then later on becomes an Olympian, and some of those people are probably choking on their own tongue at the time with just saying that was right. But that was one of those hallmark moments that opened the door to people going, hey, we can be Olympians, because everybody thought of Eastern Bloc countries as dominated by, well, this summer we won both the men's and women's hammer, as that evolution.
Yep.
14 years later, however many years later we are now.
Somewhere there,
from 2008 to 2024, 16 years later. And so to watch that progress into as the moments that were really stood out for me this summer were, again, when Cameron Rogers and Ethan Kasberg won the men's hammer and the women's hammer. I mean, again, hitting above our weight as a small country of 30-some million people. I'm trying to remember if there was on the men's side, if there was an American that made the final. I think there might have been one American out of the 3 athletes that they had there, so on. And not just those 2 medalists, but we had 3 other athletes that were in the mix and in the final. Rowan had the capability. He could have just easily been on the fact he's just coming into his own as a hammer thrower. But one of the throws that he had that was a foul would have been pretty close to a medal as well. So it's just seeing that transition from being involved with the very first hammer thrower, male hammer thrower Jim Stacey since 1920. And then seeing this year and
kind of come to fruition,
as far as people are already calling us a hammer throw nation. We have to be careful with some of those things, but that's that's to be a part of that whole process is amazing. And to briefly talk with Jim about that, and he said it's kind of interesting to be able to see that and watch it from afar and see that you were involved now at that point, to see that as where we've come from to where we are now. And that's really one of the other moment that really stood out for me was the men's 4x100, winning the gold medal.
Yes.
Glenroy, I'm lucky enough to call Glenroy a friend. He's the head coach, and he's also involved with the relay, but he was brought in I want to say it was 2000. And the idea was that we were going to kind of semi-centralize the relay program. And that's not done in a lot of places where there's a lot of talent. The U.S. has all of the fastest sprinters, and Jamaica has all of the sprinters, but they don't centralize. So the idea was to get these guys together as much as possible to win medals. And they did. They went from bronze. They had a couple of silver medals, and then to see that happen on the day, and it was really a defining moment, between Dana and Dana, who's our biomechanist, who's been really integral to that program. We're standing behind each other. We started hugging and high-fiving each other. We didn't even realize, because it was just a culmination of things that were, I wasn't directly involved with the program, but you're adjacent to it and talking about, the things that are going on. You're in the practices and seeing what's going on and seeing where that's headed. And a lot of people after the first round, when they qualified to get into the final, say, they didn't run that well. And they were pretty much almost a second slower in the heats. But just having been there was a number of us going, these guys, they put it together and really push it the way they have been in training, there's going to be a medal. And it would have taken, everybody says, the U.S. had problems getting the baton around. They still would have had to run extremely, extremely well to beat them in that time. It's not just because of that. But that is a factor. You have to get the baton around. But also, even if they had, it would have been tough. Just that they were on that day, and to see them go from bronze to silver and a couple of silvers and then to gold medal was what I was really happy for those guys, because they probably won't be around for too much longer. They might be there for World Championships next year, but I'm not sure any of them will be around for 2028. So we're now in that rebuilding phase with probably a start for the 4x1, so it'll be fun to watch again. But that was 25 years in the making to get to that gold medal. And so sometimes we look at things in these small fragments, but having the big term or the long-term vision like Glenroy's had with the relay program, and seeing that come to fruition finally after those years, to get on the top of the podium instead of just getting a medal, which was a goal at the beginning, to be honest. That was the goal, with on the podium, was to get on the podium, right? On the top. And they did do that. They'd done that a number of times, but really to get to the top of the podium, that then became the top goal. So,
That's wonderful. Yeah, and it was, I remember watching Andre de Grasse when I was in 2016, I think it was, when he had that
yeah.
moment with Usain Bolt. You know, they're looking at each other and stuff. So it's so cool. And then watching this year, I'm like, one of my sports I like paying attention to in the Summer Olympics is this, like you said, the 4x100. Yeah. It's always a big one, and just seeing that raw, just holy crap, like we did it, and everybody's so fantastically emotional. It's amazing.
The thing I equate it to, and unfortunately to go back to 1988 when Ben Johnson won, but then 24 hours later tested positive for stanozol. I mean, you know, it was the highest of moments and the lowest of moments. And
right away,
you know, now knowing these guys are clean and they're tested all the time, and what I see them go through to get to that point is just all the more rewarding to see that happen on the day, for sure. You know?
Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I got one last question I kind of like to ask people.
For sure.
A little bit of a reflection question on yourself. Is you know, reflecting on your journey as a coach, as an athlete even, what advice would you give your younger self? Like, say, you're talking to Larry, who's just getting into coaching. What's some advice you might give him?
Wow, that's a little tougher to answer, because there's probably all kinds of things I would tell myself.
Or even just younger coaches today.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things I think that comes first to mind is, and I use this a lot when I'm doing coaching seminars or coach education stuff, is don't use the word don't. And the reason I say that is we aren't sometimes cognizant of our language. And language has a really powerful impact, negative or positive. And, you know, as a quick and dirty example, if I tell you not to think about a cow laying down, what was the first thing you think about?
I'm picturing a
cow laying down. So as coaches, we get caught up into don't do that. Don't do that. Okay. But that doesn't give guidance to the athlete as to, okay, well, what do I need to do? Right. And so it took, you know, many years to get that out of my lexicon, the don't aspect. And I pride myself on the fact that now it's like, okay, you need to do this, or if we can do this, this will be more optimal, as opposed to don't do that. And it always comes home to me, and the athletes bring it home to me all the time when we're at competitions. And there's a number of coaches that are quite boisterous, and they're shouting from the sidelines, don't do this, don't do that. Okay, and well, tell them what to do, right? And my athletes kind of point that out to me, because sometimes I forget that was one of the things that I really did, and you know, for many years, was changing my lexicon so that wasn't in there. I still use word don't, and I try to avoid it as much as possible, but not in sporting life. Yeah. You know what I mean? Because there are things, but in sporting life, when I'm coaching, very, very rarely anymore, if at all, does the word form get into my lexicon when I'm actually coaching. And that makes a huge difference on giving them by just what you say and the way that you say it, and the choice of your words helps to make an improvement, because they now have a visual of what they need. If I say you need to put your right foot down sooner at the high point, they know what I'm doing. Don't put, you know, it's more don't be late with your right foot. Well, okay. Well, what does that mean?
What's on time then? Yeah.
Exactly. What do I need to do? And as coaches, we sometimes do fall down on that a lot. We point out today we're very critical, and you can be, but if you're doing it in trying to word everything in a positive form, that's going to be far more effective than, because we already give way too much feedback. And that would be the other thing that I would probably tell myself is try to watch how much feedback you're giving. Are you cheering them on, or are you giving them positive feedback, right? If we take out the negative feedback side of it, if we're critiquing, are we cheerleading, or are we actually, and there's a big difference about saying, that was good. Okay. Well, what was good? Yeah. If you can say, okay, that was much better putting your right foot down, that gives a much better feedback model and a feedback echo chamber for them than just saying, that was good. Okay, well, because the athlete, you can be guaranteed that the athlete's not necessarily thinking about what you were hoping at that time, despite the fact that you've done your best for them to work on one singular thing and only focus on that one singular thing. I can always tell when an athlete's not, because the first thing that they do is they complete the repetition and they go, well, how was this? And I go, that's not what we were working on. Yeah. And you can tell that it's always going. So the more you can control that framework and get them focused on the task at hand and give feedback on the task at hand, which is direct, that's more meaningful than just, in a sense, cheerleading and or just being critical and or just giving the negative feedback of don't do something. So try to really find a way to hone that. And it's so ingrained in what we do in our daily lives. Don't do this, don't do that, don't do this.
Yeah, hear from your parents all the time as a kid.
Yeah. And so, it's hard. And they, for a lot of years when I was a kid, it was a big thing in the 70s. Way before you were born, but there was, that was a thing when you were a parent. You weren't supposed to tell your kids don't. You're supposed to find a positive, and it's kind of the same thing. Much harder to do when you're, kid's about to touch a stove and you're trying to, and it's a safety thing. I have no problems with somebody saying don't, but if you're generally trying to change behavior, and most psychologists will tell you this, and that take part in cognitive behavior therapy, is you need to frame it in a positive way that. Or not just positive, but in a way that gives them directive, as opposed to something that you don't want them to focus on, right? Because the more we say don't, that's what they end up focusing on.
Fixated on that,
and fixate on it. So those two things would probably be the most important things, I think, that I would say from the coaching philosophy or the lexicon or the way that you interact with athletes. I would say that those are the two most important things that I'd probably go back and tell myself and kick myself much earlier in my career to kind of move that time. And, I've had a number of athletes that, at the time when I was a young coach and I thought I knew everything, and they were, they would say, well, then what do I need to do? You know what I mean? It's something like, oh yeah, okay, I'm telling them not what to do. I'm not telling them what to do. So
gotcha. Yeah. Well, that's amazing. I think, anybody listening today or wherever you're listening to this from, that might be some pretty good things to think. And not just like, on coaching, but just in life too. Like you said, go back to the very beginning we talked to. So, well, Larry, again, just thank you for sharing your journey with us. I feel like we could do another 6 hours of this, but
easily.
Yeah. Anyways, thank you for coming in. It's been an awesome sharing your insight and sharing your philosophies and everything like that.
Thank you very much.
And for everybody listening, thanks for tuning in to YQL Stories. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, like, and comment.
Awesome.
Cheers.
Hey. Thank you.
Well, everyone, that's a wrap of the Season 2 YQL Stories podcast series presented by the Lethbridge Sport Council. It has been an absolute pleasure to share the mic with these exceptional individuals who represented Lethbridge and Canada on the world stage. I hope you enjoyed hearing from our guests as much as I did, and if you want to learn more about what we can offer here at the Lethbridge Sport Council, please check out the links in any of the Season 2 podcast bios. And now to close, I would just like to say the power of sport is truly amazing. And whether you are a competitive athlete, a retired athlete, or someone who is just getting introduced into sport, remember that sport is a privilege. Enjoy the process, and most importantly, have fun. My name is Alex Engel. Thank you for listening.